The sky burned red as the transport ship screamed across the atmosphere of an unknown planet. Inside the ship, Elira held onto her seat tightly, her heart beating fast. Everything was shaking, lights flashing, metal groaning. The last thing she remembered was silence, then an explosion. Then darkness. When she woke up, Elira was lying on the ground outside. Her suit was torn, her arm bleeding, and her oxygen tank was almost empty. The sky above her was filled with thick green clouds and two suns. The air was strange but breathable. The ship was gone, broken into pieces across the rough landscape. She sat up slowly, her body aching. She called out, "Is anyone there?" No one answered. Then she heard something. Footsteps, not human, slow and heavy. Elira reached for her emergency knife, her hands shaking, from behind a broken wing of the ship. A figure stepped forward. It wasn't human. Tall, muscular, with dark blue skin and eyes that glowed faintly, an alien soldier from the enemy side. He was injured too, one of his arms hanging uselessly, but he looked strong and alert. They stared at each other, frozen, both tired, both hurt, for a moment. It felt like time stopped. Then he raised both hands, slowly showing he had no weapon. Elira didn't move. Her training said, never trust an alien alone. But her heart said something else. This planet wasn't safe. The landscape was dry, filled with sharp rocks and strange thorny plants. The wind howled like a warning. And the sun burned too hot. The alien spoke in a deep, rough voice. His words made no sense. A different language, but when Elira pointed to her wound, he seemed to understand. He took a small tube from his belt and tossed it near her feet. She picked it up, which a healing gel. She looked at him again, confused, unsure. Was this a trick? Or was he trying to help? The ground suddenly shook beneath them. A small quake rolled through the valley from behind the rocks. A sharp growl echoed a sound neither of them had heard before. Elira and the alien looked at each other, no words. Where needed, they both started running. They found shelter in the half-buried escape pod. Inside, it was dark and tight, but it kept the wind out. Elira used the healing gel on her arm. It stung, but stopped the bleeding. The alien sat across from her, breathing heavily. In silence, they watched each other, trying to understand. Hours passed. Outside, the strange growling came and went. Inside, they tried to stay calm. Elira used her translator, trying to connect to his speech, but the device was damaged, only picking up a few words. Enemy. Crash. Survive. He wasn't here to fight. He was stranded, just like her. That night, they sat beside the emergency heater, sharing dry food. Elira offered him some of her rations. He hesitated, then took it. They chewed in silence. Two enemies, sitting like friends, or maybe just survivors. Elira stared at the alien. He didn't look like the monsters her people described. Oh, he looked tired, wounded, and maybe even kind. His eyes weren't angry, they were sad, like hers. She whispered softly, more to herself than him. We're really stuck here, huh? He didn't understand the words, but he nodded slowly. They were alone, on a dead planet. No one was coming, not today, maybe not ever. Suddenly, a loud thump hit the pod. They both stood up fast, alert. The growling was closer now. Something was outside, something big. The alien reached for a tool from his belt. Shaped like a blade, Elira grabbed her knife, her hands cold with fear. They stood back to back, ready to fight whatever came next. The pod shook again, then silence, then footsteps walking away. Elira's legs almost gave out from relief. She dropped to her knees, breathing hard. The alien crouched beside her, watching carefully. She looked at him and gave a small, tired smile. He didn't smile back, but he didn't look away. In that moment, they weren't enemies anymore. They were just two beings strapped, scared, and trying to survive as the night grew darker. Elira whispered again, "Guess we're in this together." And this time, the alien repeated a word in her language, softly. Together, the wind howled again. But inside the pod, two strangers were no longer strangers. They were survivors. And something far bigger was just beginning. The next morning, the two survivors stepped out of the escape pod with heavy eyes and stiff movements. The double suns had returned, burning the ground like fire. Elira shaded her face with her hand, scanning the horizon. The sky was a strange shade of pale green, and in the distance the mountains looked like giant bones. There was no sound except the wind and the low hum of the ground. The planet felt quiet, but not peaceful. It felt like something was watching them. Zarak moved ahead slowly, his wounded arm still weak but improving. He didn't speak, but every step he took was calculated, careful, almost like a soldier scouting enemy land. Elira followed, unsure what they were looking for. Water, shelter, answers, maybe all of them. Every few minutes she glanced back at the crash site. Smoke still rose from the ruins. No signals, no rescue. Just emptiness. They walked through narrow, rocky paths where the stones looked cut by claws, not time. Elira tripped once, falling to her knees. Zarak turned quickly and offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then accepted. His skin was rough, warm, unfamiliar, but steady. She stood up and gave him a small nod. Neither of them smiled. Later, they reached a dried-up riverbed. Cracks ran along the dirt like spiderwebs. Zarak knelt, touched the earth, and sniffed the dust. He made a gesture Elira didn't understand, then pointed to the side where a small patch of moss clung to the rocks. It was glowing faintly blue. She bent down and touched it. Cold, wet. She smiled, finally. Water, or at least the start of it. They followed the glowing trail into a narrow cave. The walls pulsed softly, like the place was alive. The deeper they went, the warmer it became. Elira's skin tingled. Her ears buzzed faintly. She didn't trust it, but it was better than sleeping under open sky. Inside, they found an old alien structure half buried in the rock. A forgotten probe, maybe, covered in vines, humming quietly. Zarak pulled the vines away and activated the device with a wave of his hand. Lights flickered. A compartment slid open, revealing a sealed case. Inside were 2 vials of liquid, marked with strange symbols. Elira looked at them, then at Zarak. He nodded. She hesitated. But thirst and hunger won. She took a sip. The taste was bitter, metallic. But after a few seconds, her mind felt clearer, her breath deeper. Her hands stopped shaking. They both drank. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Something had shifted between them since the night before. She no longer saw him as the enemy. He was her only link to survival, and she was his. The cave rumbled faintly. Dust fell from the ceiling. They froze. Then the sound faded. Zarak scanned the cave, then pointed to the side wall. He pulled away more vines, revealing old drawings carved into the stone. Elira stepped closer. The carvings showed creatures, some that looked like Zarak, others she didn't recognize. And one figure standing between 2 races, holding something, glowing in its chest. A star, or maybe a seed. She felt a chill. They spent the night inside that cave, silent, alert, but strangely calm. Elira couldn't sleep much. Her mind kept returning to the drink, the drawings, and Zarak's eyes. He never looked away from the entrance, always alert, always protecting. For someone she was taught to hate, he seemed more human than most. Humans, she knew. At one point, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a small metal chip, her family photos on it. Her parents, her little sister, all smiling. She stared at it in the dim blue light. Then she looked up and saw Zarek watching. Without a word, she slid the chip across the ground to him. He picked it up, studied it quietly. Then, slowly, he reached into his own belt and took out a tiny crystal pendant. It shimmered like fire. He handed it to her. She took it, surprised by how warm it was. A gift, a sign of trust, or maybe something deeper. She didn't ask. She just nodded and placed it beside her on the ground. The night passed slowly. Strange. Whispers echoed in the cave. Not voices, but something else like the planet itself was breathing through the stones. Alira closed her eyes and listened. It was a sound she would never forget. At dawn, they prepared to move again. Zarek handed her one of the vials. She took it without question. They packed what little they had and stepped out into the blinding light together. The path ahead was unknown, but neither of them looked back, because something had begun between them, something beyond survival and far above. In orbit, a dark shape blinked once in the shadows of the clouds, watching, recording, waiting. Asterisk. The third day on the planet began with a warning, though neither Alira nor Zarek understood it at first. A strange vibration pulsed through the ground, soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Alira woke with her fingers twitching and her chest tight. Zarek was already on his feet, standing near the cave entrance. His eyes locked on the horizon. The air outside shimmered like heat waves bending reality. But it wasn't just heat. They stepped out together. Wordless, their bond now unspoken. The moss trail that once glowed blue was gone blackened, curled like burned paper. The sky had changed colors again, now a pale yellow. The clouds moving faster than normal. Alira turned in slow circles, suddenly aware of something she hadn't noticed before. There were no animals, no birds, not even insects, just them, and the hum of something alive and close. Zarek touched the dirt, then pressed his hand to the ground. Listening, he turned to Alira and pointed down, then spread his fingers wide. She didn't understand until the earth beneath her shoes shifted slightly. The planet was moving, breathing almost like it was waking up. They began to run, heading toward the higher ground. The cracked riverbed they had passed earlier was gone, swallowed by rising mud. Something massive was beneath the surface, something old, slow, and aware. The entire planet wasn't just a place to survive. It was a living thing, and it didn't want them here. As they climbed a jagged ridge, Alira stumbled again, her head dizzy. Zarek grabbed her arm, pulled her up with strength that surprised her. But the moment he touched her, something strange happened. A sharp, electric jolt passed between them. Both of them gasped and jerked back, blinking in confusion. Her skin felt hot, her breath unsteady. Zarek stared at his own hand, then looked at her with wide eyes. They said nothing, but the moment stayed between them, heavy, strange. It wasn't just the serum anymore. Something deeper was changing inside them both. Hours passed before they found a safer spot, a plateau with stone pillars that rose like teeth. Between them, they discovered what looked like another alien device buried halfway in the rock. It was old, half broken, but glowing faintly green. Zarek approached it carefully, brushing dust from the control panel. Alira stood back, watching. The panel lit up as he touched it, and a hologram flickered to life. A planet map appeared, one that showed this place years ago, green and alive. But then, darkness spread across it like a sickness, and symbols flashed red. Quarantine. Alira didn't need translation to understand the word. This planet was sealed off for a reason. Zarek turned to her and said something urgently. She couldn't understand the words, but his expression told her enough. This place was dangerous. Cursed, or worse. They weren't just stranded. They were trapped inside a living tomb. That night, the stars didn't shine. Instead, The sky pulsed slowly with a red glow from deep space, like the planet was signaling someone. Or something. Elira sat beside the small fire they'd made with broken probe pieces. Zarek was asleep nearby, breathing softly, curled up like a soldier ready to wake at the slightest sound. She stared at him for a long time, her thoughts spinning. How strange it was, this alien, once her enemy, now the only soul in the universe who shared her nightmare. Her stomach twisted with unease, not from fear, but from something else, a warmth in her chest, a tightness in her lower belly. She placed a hand there, confused. Her body had been reacting strangely ever since she drank that serum, but now something felt different, alive. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a low groan, deep and long, like the ground was speaking. Zarek woke instantly, sitting up with alert eyes. Elira rose too. Clutching her jacket tightly from the distance, pillars of dust exploded into the sky. Something was rising from beneath the surface. They didn't wait. They grabbed their things and ran toward the cliffs. Behind them, the ground cracked open like a wound, and glowing vines slithered from the soil. They pulsed with red light and moved like fingers searching in the dark. Elira and Zarek reached the edge just in time, sliding down into a narrow trench. The vines stopped at the edge, hissing, retreating. They landed hard, coughing, covered in dirt. Zarek checked her quickly. For injuries? She shook her head, still catching her breath. But again, when his hand touched her shoulder, the same electric heat sparked between them. Stronger this time. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. They stared into each other's eyes for a long second. The alien world around them groaned and shifted like a living storm. But deep below all of that, something had taken root. Something new, something strange, and perhaps something unstoppable. They were not just survivors now. They were becoming part of this planet's story, and whatever was growing inside her might be the key to everything. The trench walls were damp and warm, pulsing faintly in the dark, like they were inside the lung of some sleeping beast. Elira didn't speak, too afraid her voice would wake the planet again. Zarek moved beside her like a shadow, one hand on the wall, feeling its breath. They didn't need to talk anymore. There was a rhythm to their silence now, like they were moving through the same thought, the same heartbeat. Hours passed, or maybe longer, until the tunnel curved upward into a hollow cavern. There, hanging from the ceiling like glowing eggs, were strange pods, half organic, half metal. Some were cracked open, others still pulsing with green-blue light. Zarek walked ahead and reached for one, carefully touching its shell. It opened with a hiss, revealing dry rations and a rolled data scroll. They weren't the first ones to be stranded here. Elira stood at the center of the cavern, staring at the markings carved into the wall. Swirl stars, and two figures standing hand in hand beneath a massive tree. One of them looked human, the other wasn't. She stepped back, her pulse racing. She didn't know what disturbed her more, that someone had drawn this long ago, or that she recognized herself in the drawing. Later that night, they camped near a thermal vent where steam rose from cracks in the ground, keeping the air warm. Zarek gathered stones and stacked them in a careful circle. Elira watched him move, precise and calm, his face lit by the fire's glow. She whispered, "Why do you help me?" He didn't understand her words, but he tilted his head and pointed to her chest, then to his, then drew a circle in the dirt between them. Not enemies, not strangers anymore, connected. As the flames flickered, Elira leaned back against the warm stone and exhaled slowly. Her body ached in places it hadn't before, her lower back, her belly, her chest. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It felt like pressure, like something inside her was growing. She closed her eyes, but behind her lids danced flashes of light. Of the moment she touched Zarek, of the serum, of the electric spark between them. she awoke to Zarek's hand, gently shaking her. The ground was rumbling again, but softer. This time, most like a song. Above them, the ceiling shimmered, and particles of light floated down like snow. Zarek stepped into it, eyes wide, letting the golden mist settle on his skin. Illyra followed, and as the dust touched her, she felt something shift inside her again, a heartbeat not hers, a second one. Faint, unfamiliar, but alive. She gasped and touched her stomach. Zarek noticed his gaze moving to her hands, then to her face, and in that moment, without any words spoken, he understood. He stepped closer, carefully, and placed one hand over hers, his fingers large and warm, trembling just slightly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up into his eyes and whispered, "It's real." He didn't know the words, but her voice, soft, full of fear and wonder, told him everything. Neither of them knew what it meant yet, or how it had happened, but the signs were there, her dreams, the spark, the serum, the planet itself. Something ancient had chosen them, or maybe forced them. But now, it was no longer just about survival. It was about creation, a new life, a new kind of future. They sat in silence, the golden mist still falling around them like stardust. Zarek pulled a small cloth from his belt and offered it to her. Illyra smiled softly and took it, wiping her eyes. Then she leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beside hers. Two survivors, once enemies, now bound by something bigger than war. The cavern lights dimmed slowly, like the planet had seen what it wanted to see. Outside, the winds howled again, and far above, the skies rippled like fabric. Something was coming, something large, but for this single moment, tucked away beneath a living world. They weren't afraid. Because even if the world hated them, even if no one came, they weren't alone anymore. And something inside Illyra now beat with both their blood, and it was stronger than anything either of them had known. Illyra could no longer pretend the changes in her body were just side effects of stress or trauma. The feeling was too real, too constant, like a soft echo from inside her, one that responded when she was still. She had stopped counting days. But her body hadn't. It remembered something her mind couldn't explain. She wasn't sick. She was pregnant. Zarek knew too. Even without words, he had watched her movements shift. Her breathing change, her eyes looked distant when she touched her belly. He said nothing, but his presence became protective. He walked closer to her now, kept his hand near the small blade at all times, and scouted every path ahead before she took a single step. He had become more than a companion, he was a silent guardian. They moved through a new region of the planet, a place where the ground was softer, almost sponge-like. Huge trees, twisted and hollow, reached toward the sky like frozen screams. Their bark pulsed faintly, like veins carrying blood. Sometimes, Illyra thought she could hear whispers through them, soft voices. Not language exactly, but memory. The planet was alive, and it remembered things. It remembered pain. It remembered life. They found a place to rest near a crystal pond that shimmered in colors they couldn't name. The water was clean, the air gentle, and for once it felt almost safe. Zarek gathered smooth stones and carved symbols into them. Illyra watched. Fascinated, he placed the stones around them in a perfect circle, then nodded as if completing a ritual. She pointed at one of the symbols and raised her eyebrow. Zarek touched it and then pointed to her belly. She understood. Protection. That night Illyra woke from a dream where she was floating inside the planet's core. It wasn't a nightmare. There was no fear, only warmth and rhythm. She had seen herself from above, her body glowing, her hands cradling a child that looked like starlight. When she woke, Zarek was sitting near the fire again, sharpening a stick into a spear. His expression was tense, eyes scanning the darkness. Beyond the pond, Illyra sat beside him. Quiet. The flames danced in his eyes. But he didn't look at her. He was listening. Suddenly, a sharp cry echoed from the woods, a cry that wasn't theirs. It was high-pitched, pained, and too intelligent to be an animal. Zarak stood up instantly, spear ready. Illyra grabbed her torch and followed without question. They found the source. Half buried under collapsed tree roots, a small creature, half metal, half flesh, struggling to free itself. Its eye blinked rapidly, switching between red and blue. It wasn't dangerous, just broken. Zarak lifted the roots and pulled it free. It buzzed weakly, then projected a small hologram of the Planet A warning map. Red zones marked areas that pulsed like infected wounds. Their location was slowly turning red. The planet was rejecting them, or worse, it was preparing to purge everything foreign. Illyra felt it now in the air. The heat under her skin. They had stayed too long in one place, and the planet knew, back at the pond. The water had darkened slightly. The plants around them folded inward like they were hiding. Zarak gathered their supplies quickly, tossing only the essentials into a sack. But Illyra paused, placing her hand over her stomach. She didn't feel afraid, only aware. The child inside her was not just part of her. It was part of this world too. As they fled the area, the crystal pond exploded behind them. Sending a geyser of light into the sky, the trees groaned, twisted, and collapsed inward like they were melting. The ground shook harder than before, forcing them to crawl through the dirt. Zarak pulled her close, shielding her from falling debris. His skin bled from sharp thorns, but he didn't stop. He just whispered one word again and again, his word for her. For safe, for home. They reached a canyon edge as dawn began to rise. Below them, thick fog covered the world. But in the distance, a single black tower pierced the clouds. Not natural. Not part of the planet. A structure? Maybe alien, maybe human. Zarak pointed, then looked at her belly again. He knew what she already decided. They couldn't run anymore. They needed answers about this world, the child, and what was coming. Next, as the sun climbed the sky and the canyon groaned beneath them, Illyra took Zarak's hand, not out of fear, but because it felt right. Whatever was ahead, whatever this child meant for both species, it had already begun. Inside her, something ancient was waking. And it would not be ignored. The journey toward the Black Tower wasn't a straight path. It was like the planet itself tried to mislead them. Shifting valleys, moving rock formations, and hiding trails that were there just a day before. Illyra and Zarak pressed forward, though every step now felt heavier, not from the weight of supplies, but from the knowledge growing inside them. This wasn't just a survival mission anymore. They were part of something bigger, something the planet was preparing for, or perhaps warning against. The deeper they traveled, the more unnatural the world became. They passed trees that whispered in tones matching Illyra's heartbeat, patches of ground that reflected their memories, showing flickers of Earth and Zarak's homeworld like ghosts trapped in the soil. Once, Illyra even saw her sister's face in the water, smiling, then fading into ripples. The planet wasn't just alive. It was intelligent, and it was watching her child more closely now. By the time they reached the outskirts of the Black Tower, they both felt it, a buzzing in their teeth, a pressure in their bones. The tower wasn't built by nature, nor was it shaped by hands. It stood like a monument of warning, made from smooth, dark stone that absorbed all light. No door, no window, just a thin line down the middle. But as soon as Illyra stepped forward, the line widened with a low hiss. It opened for her, not Zarak, not both, just her. She looked at him, uncertain. Zarak touched her shoulder, nodded once, then stepped back without argument. He understood this was her path now. She crossed the threshold, and the door sealed shut behind her. Total silence, total darkness, then light. Not from above or below, but from within the walls themselves. Symbols lit up, shifting, rotating, matching patterns she had seen in her dreams. A voice, not quite male or female, filled the space, not a language, but meaning delivered directly into her mind. You carry the bridge. It said, the seed of balance. Illyria staggered backward, holding her belly, the child still. Just cells, maybe more, responded to the voice. A small flutter, like it understood, like it agreed. The voice spoke again. What you carry is not allowed, but it is necessary. Suddenly, the walls shifted and showed her visions to galaxies in conflict, species torn by war. Then an image of her and Zarek standing side by side with a child that looked like neither of them, and both at once. A child who calmed the storm with a single word. A child who wasn't supposed to exist, but had come anyway. Illyria stepped forward. Reaching toward the images, her hand passed through them like smoke. But something stuck to her skin, glowing threads of light that wrapped around her wrist and vanished into her veins. She gasped, not from pain, but from understanding. The child inside her had been chosen by the planet, by something older. Not by accident. The room darkened again, and the door reopened. Zarek stood waiting, spear in hand, ready to fight. When he saw her, his eyes widened. Something about her had changed. She glowed faintly now, her breath steady, her steps confident. She walked straight to him and placed his hand gently on her belly. He flinched at first, then froze. His eyes widened further as he felt something stir inside her. A spark, a pulse too strong for something so small. He looked at her with fear, awe, maybe both. She whispered one word, chosen, and though he didn't fully understand, he nodded. They turned from the tower, ready to leave, but just before they reached the edge of the clearing, the sky cracked like glass. A ship descended, not human, not alien, something in between. Silent, sleek, made of light and metal. It hovered above them for several long seconds, then dropped a single object, a cube, glowing red. It landed softly and pulsed with energy. Zarek stepped toward it, but Illyria pulled him back. The cube opened on its own, projecting a symbol into the sky, one neither of them recognized. But her unborn child kicked suddenly, as if it did. The message was clear. Others had noticed their time on this planet was running out, but their real journey was just beginning. The cube didn't make a sound, but Illyria felt it speak, not in words, in instincts. Memories, pressure behind her eyes. She saw flashes. A giant council of unknown species seated around a hollow star. A war that started long before humans ever touched the stars, and a decision that had already been made. Her child wasn't an accident. It was a warning or a weapon. Zarek circled the cube with silent caution, spear ready, but not raised. The symbols above it shifted again, then slowly began forming shapes. A figure appeared in the light, a woman. Not Illyria, but close. Same build, same eyes, but older, worn, scarred. She wasn't speaking to them, she was speaking about them. Illyria Cass, genetic fusion confirmed, the figure said. Subject viable, womb stable, child developing beyond projections. Zarek glanced at Illyria, confused, but she couldn't breathe. Her name, her situation, it was already known, recorded, studied. They hadn't just crashed. They'd been sent. She stumbled back, heart pounding. Zara caught her, gripping her arms to steady her. She looked into his eyes and shook her head. We were never alone, and now they were no longer hidden. The cube shut down, collapsing into dust like it had finished its task. Above them, the sky began to shift. Not in color, but in texture, like something invisible had just passed through the clouds. A tremor ran through the ground, different from before. Not the planet moving, but something arriving. They ran, not in fear, but with urgency, back through the forest of pulsing trees. Past the broken crystals and humming roots, the planet had changed again. Colors darker. Its light dimmer. It knew what was coming. It was bracing. By the time they reached the stone ridge where they first saw the tower, a new structure had appeared, floating just above the ground, shimmering, angular, alive. A ship, but not one they'd seen before. It didn't land, it waited. Alira placed a hand on her stomach. The child inside moved not with fear, but strength, a slow roll, then stillness. Like it recognized the vessel or had summoned it, Zarek stared at the craft with narrowed eyes. His breathing calm but heavy. He pulled out his blade again. But Alira stepped forward and lowered his arm gently. "No more fighting," she said softly, and somehow he understood. The ship opened not with force, but like a flower blooming in silence. Inside, golden light, they stepped in together. And the door closed behind them like the end of a sentence. No controls, no screens, just a pulse that matched her own. And the soft hum of something ancient waking up. Then the voice returned not in her mind this time, but in the air. "You were the accident they feared. You are the future they need." The ship lifted, slow and steady. The planet below shrank. But it didn't resist. It let them go, because its purpose was fulfilled. In orbit, other ships appeared massive. Silent, waiting, but they didn't attack. They followed, one by one, as if answering a call none of them remembered, sending Alira leaned against Zarek, exhausted but alive. His arm wrapped around her as they watched the stars stretch ahead in her belly. Their child shifted again stronger now, a bridge between two bloodlines. A new language of peace wrapped in skin and bone. They had come from a crash, from silence and suspicion. But now they were being carried into something far greater. Not just parents, not just survivors, but the first of a future no one believed could exist, and the universe was watching, waiting, and ready to change.